This is the story of one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in Australian history, the Somerton Man, a man who was found dead on an Adelaide beach in 1948 without any identification, and with plenty of clues that led nowhere. The police were called to the scene, and they soon realized that this was no ordinary case. They started to wonder if this man had perhaps met with foul play. But despite scouring every inch of his clothing and personal effects, they couldn't find anything to link him to anyone or anywhere. Their persistence paid off when they found some rather cryptic writings in what turned out to be a previously removed section. The police didn't know how to proceed, and the weeks turned into months with little progress being made. So, why did she write "for love of my life" followed by an address? To this day, nobody knows. However, thanks to advances in technology, in 2021, the writing in the book was finally put into a computer program to recognize handwriting. This person said that he had been walking down a street in Sydney when he saw a man fitting the description of Mr. Nobody standing next to a taxi. He also claimed that the man looked very much like a famous Hollywood actor, Clark Gable. This idea was put forth by a historian who pointed out that there were several sightings of Weimar in Adelaide around the time of the Somerton. And according to his wife, he had been at home sick with a cold when the alleged incident occurred, so he certainly would not have been able to go to Adelaide. Man's death, and that Weimar was known to have had an interest in poetry, specifically the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. There's also a theory that the Somerton Man was Major Harold Frederick Giblin, a pilot who went missing in 1943 after taking off from Port Darwin in Australia. According to this theory, Frost changed his appearance and assumed a false identity, then died on Somerton Beach, and fortunately, despite this helpful tip, the police were still no closer to figuring out the man's true identity. Well, according to retired spy-turned-author Keith Jeffrey, the Somerton Man may have actually been a British spy who infiltrated the Nazi German consulate in Melbourne. He also thinks that the strange clues left behind, such as the book with the cryptic messages, were deliberate attempts to throw off investigators. However, in 2016, another author named David Lowe debunked Jeffrey's theory. All we can do is speculate based on the limited information we have, pointing out that there was no evidence that any British spies had been active in Germany at the time, and that the British government would have had no reason to cover up such an incident. However, this doesn't explain why someone would take such elaborate measures to conceal their identity. The idea that he might have been a spy was first put forth by the police themselves, who believed that his mysterious behavior and lack of identification suggested that he was working under a false flag. The results were fascinating, revealing that the handwriting belonged to a woman named Jessica Mabel Bowden, who the police confirmed was alive and well living in Queensland. However, in 1948, when the body was discovered, there was already a death certificate for Giblin. What we do know is that the Somerton Man is one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in Australian history, and that his case continues to fascinate people more than 70 years later. Or click this other video instead. So it seems unlikely that he could have been both dead and alive at the same time. One caller even claimed that their father had worked with a man who had lost his wife and kids in a car accident, and that the grieving widower had taken up the hobby of collecting rare books. Could this be our man? Perhaps. But unfortunately, this line of inquiry also came to nothing. After a lot of head-scratching, the officers eventually deciphered the text, which consisted of a series of addresses, one of which included the words "for love of my life." Some believe he was an undercover spy, while others think he was a victim of a crime that went horribly wrong. There are even those who believe he was an escaped mental patient. The police hoped that one of these addresses could lead them to the mystery man's identity, but unfortunately, none of them did. The man was well dressed, but he had no wallet or ID. There was nothing on him that could identify him, and it wasn't long before he was identified as a John Doe, or in this case a Mr. Nobody. This is a strange tale that even after more than 70 years still has people scratching their heads. On December 1, 1948, a man's body washed up on the shore of Somerton Beach near Adelaide, Australia. But as the days went by and nobody came forward to claim the body, the police became more suspicious. One clue that particularly intrigued them was a piece of paper found in the dead man's shoe. It contained 4 letters, tamam shud, which when translated from Persian means ended. While this didn't immediately raise any eyebrows, it soon became clear why the police were interested. That's because the phrase tamam shud was also found scrunched up inside a hollowed-out copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a book of poetry, which was later found in the dead man's suitcase. And what made this all the more peculiar was that the book was missing its front cover and several pages. So the police went through the book page by page to try and figure out where they might have come from. It was at this point that the investigation hit a bit of a snag. However, she told the police that while she did indeed write those words, she had no idea who the mysterious dead man was or how her name had ended up in his book. But another breakthrough came when the public got involved. Someone came forward claiming to have seen the man alive and well 2 years prior to his death in 1946. Then in 2009, a documentary about the mystery aired on Australian television, which resulted in more than 1,000 calls to the police with new leads and theories. Over the years, many theories have been proposed about who the Somerton Man could have been. In fact, there's one particular theory that he was Karl Wilhelm Weimer, a German spy who was believed to have drowned trying to escape from authorities in 1945. But when police searched Weimar's family home, they only found his wife and 2 daughters. There's also a theory that the Somerton Man was Captain Lionel Frost, a decorated World War II hero who disappeared after crashing a stolen aircraft in 1945. But this theory falls apart when you consider that Frost's plane was found intact on an island, and there were no signs that he had tried to escape. It is possible that Giblin was shot down and spent the last few years of his life hiding out in South Australia until he was eventually caught and executed by the Japanese. Of course, we can't forget the most popular theory of all, the one that suggests the Somerton Man was an undercover spy. But the question remains, if he was a spy, who was he working for? Was he spying on the Australians or was he spying for Australia? Jeffrey believes that the man was killed by the Gestapo after they discovered his true identity and dumped his body in the ocean to make it look like an accident. According to Jeffrey, the reason the case was never solved was because the British government didn't want the public to know that they had spies operating in Germany. But here's the thing, we may never know for sure who the Somerton Man was or why he was really there. Some experts believe that he wasn't a spy or a victim of foul play, but simply a drifter who chose to end his own life. Others believe that the man was suffering from a mental illness, but this doesn't explain why he had no documents or why he was carrying a book with cryptic messages. The truth is, there are so many unanswered questions in this case that it's impossible to say for sure what happened. Now check out Dead Man Found Perfectly Preserved in Ice.